Karen demolished my fence with her Jeep at 6 a.m., smiling as she destroyed months of work. After 6 months of harassment, I'd had enough. My brother owns a construction company. The next morning, a 20-ton bulldozer appeared in her driveway. She moved out within a week. The sound of my fence being demolished at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning changed everything. What started as a property dispute with my neighbor Karen would escalate into a battle that consumed our entire neighborhood and taught me that sometimes, you have to fight fire with fire. My name is Mike Rodriguez and I've lived at 412 Maple Street for 8 years. It's a quiet suburban neighborhood where people wave at each other, kids play in the streets, and most disputes are settled over coffee and conversation. That changed when Karen Whitman moved in next door. Karen wasn't just difficult. She was a force of nature wrapped in designer clothes and armed with an endless supply of complaints. From day one, she made it clear that our neighborhood didn't meet her standards. She complained about my dog barking. He's a golden retriever who barely makes noise. She called the city about my unsightly vegetable garden. She even tried to get my teenage son arrested for skateboarding on the sidewalk. But the fence was where she crossed the line. The fence in question separated our two properties, a simple 6-foot wooden privacy fence that I'd installed 3 years earlier. It was completely legal, properly surveyed, and built 2 inches inside my property line to avoid any disputes. Karen hated it from the moment she moved in. "That ugly fence is blocking my view," she complained during one of her frequent visits to my front door. "I paid good money for this house and I shouldn't have to look at your backyard mess." I tried to be reasonable. "Karen, the fence is on my property. You're welcome to plant shrubs on your side if you don't like looking at it." Her face turned red. "Don't tell me what I can do with my property. That fence is coming down one way or another." I should have taken that threat more seriously. What followed was 6 months of escalating harassment that made my family's life miserable. Karen seemed to have nothing better to do than find ways to make us uncomfortable. She installed motion sensor floodlights that pointed directly at our bedroom windows, claiming she needed them for security. They went off every time a leaf blew across her yard, flooding our house with blinding light at all hours. She started parking her massive Jeep Wrangler as close to our property line as possible, making it nearly impossible for my wife Maria to get our car out of the driveway. She called the city inspector so many times about imaginary violations that he started apologizing to me personally when he had to come out for another bogus complaint. But the worst part was how it affected my family. My son Carlos, who was 16 and preparing for college applications, couldn't concentrate on his homework because of the constant drama. My daughter Sophia, only 12, started having anxiety attacks about going outside to play. Maria, who worked as a nurse and needed her sleep, was exhausted from the nightly light shows and constant stress. "We should just take the fence down," she suggested one evening after Karen had spent an hour screaming at our property line about property values and neighborhood standards. "No," I said firmly. "That fence is legal, necessary, and ours. We're not giving in to a bully." But privately, I was starting to wonder how much more we could take. Karen's next strategy was to turn the neighborhood against us. She started a social media campaign claiming that our fence was destroying the community aesthetic and hurting property values for everyone. She organized a petition demanding that we remove the fence, going door to door with a folder full of photos she'd taken of our backyard from what appeared to be a ladder or second-story window. Most of our neighbors were polite but refused to sign. They knew Karen's reputation and had dealt with her complaints about their own properties. But she did manage to get 3 signatures from people who didn't know us well, and she presented this overwhelming community opposition at the next homeowners association meeting. I attended that meeting, my first in years, and listened as Karen gave a 20-minute presentation about how our fence was destroying the neighborhood character. She had charts, graphs, and what she claimed were professional property assessments showing how our fence reduced nearby home values. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. "The fence is legal, properly installed, and on my property," I said. "I have all the permits and surveys. We built it for privacy and to keep our dogs safe. It's not going anywhere." The HOA president, a reasonable man named Tom Bailey, agreed that since the fence was legal and properly installed, there was nothing the association could do. Karen stormed out of the meeting, but not before announcing that she would take care of this problem herself. Again, I should have paid more attention to that threat. 2 weeks later, Karen installed security cameras. Not just any cameras, but professional-grade surveillance equipment that covered every inch of our property. When I pointed out that filming our private property was illegal, she claimed the cameras were only monitoring her own yard and that if we happened to be visible, that was our problem for living next door. The police agreed with me that her camera placement was inappropriate, but said it would be a civil matter requiring expensive legal action to resolve. That's when I realized Karen had money and time that I didn't. She was retired, divorced, and seemed to have unlimited resources to make our lives miserable. I, on the other hand, was a middle school teacher trying to support a family on a modest income. I couldn't afford lawyers and lengthy court battles. But Karen wasn't done. She started filing noise complaints every time we had a family barbecue, claiming our parties were disturbing the peace. She called animal control about our dog so often that they stopped responding to her calls. She even tried to have our teenage son's car towed, claiming it was parked illegally on the street in front of our own house. The stress was killing my family. Maria started having headaches that wouldn't go away. Carlos's grades began to slip. Sophia stopped playing outside altogether. Something had to give. Saturday, October 14th, started like any other weekend. I was planning to catch up on yard work, Carlos had a soccer game, and Maria was working a shift at the hospital. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard the sound of an engine revving in the driveway next door. Through the window I could see Karen in her Jeep backing out of her garage. But instead of turning toward the street, she was backing directly toward our fence. At first, I thought she was just having trouble maneuvering the large vehicle. Then I realized what was happening. She was going to ram our fence. I ran outside, shouting for her to stop, but she either couldn't hear me over the engine noise or was ignoring me completely. The Jeep hit our fence at about 15 miles per hour. The impact was devastating. 6 sections of fencing, nearly 40 feet of wood that had taken me a weekend to install, exploded into splinters and scattered across both yards. But Karen wasn't done. She put the Jeep in drive, pulled forward, and backed into the fence again, destroying another 2 sections. By the time she stopped, nearly half of our fence was completely demolished. I stood in my yard, staring at the destruction, feeling a rage I'd never experienced before. Karen climbed out of her Jeep, brushed debris off her designer jacket, and walked over to where I was standing. "Oops," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I guess I had an accident. Insurance should cover that." She turned and walked back toward her house, leaving me standing among the wreckage of 3 years of work and hundreds of dollars in materials. That's when I decided that being reasonable wasn't working anymore. I called the police, who took a report and confirmed that Karen's accident looked suspiciously intentional. They noted the tire marks, the multiple impacts, and the fact that she would have had to deliberately steer away from her driveway to hit the fence. But proving intent would be difficult, and even if we could, the maximum penalty would be a small fine and restitution for the fence materials, not the time and labor I'd invested. I called my insurance company, who said they would investigate but warned that if Karen claimed it was an accident, it could take months to resolve. I called a lawyer who quoted me $5,000 just to start a civil case, with no guarantee of success. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Karen had calculated this perfectly. She had money, time, and no conscience. She could destroy our property and tie us up in legal proceedings for years, while we struggled to afford the fight. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. She didn't know what I did for a living before I became a teacher. For 15 years before I went back to school to get my teaching degree, I had operated heavy construction equipment. Bulldozers, excavators, cranes. I could operate anything with an engine and hydraulics. More importantly, my brother Tony owned Rodriguez Construction, and he had a full fleet of equipment. That evening, I drove to Tony's house and explained what had happened. "Let me get this straight," he said after I finished the story. "This woman has been harassing your family for months, destroyed your fence with her car, and is basically untouchable because she has money and you don't?" "That's about the size of it," I confirmed. Tony was quiet for a long moment, staring out at his equipment yard where a dozen pieces of heavy machinery sat waiting for Monday morning jobs. "You know, Mike," he said finally, "I've got a D6 bulldozer that needs to be moved to a job site on Monday. But I can't remember exactly which job site. Might take me a while to figure out where it's supposed to go." I looked at my brother and saw the same anger in his eyes that I felt in my chest. "How long do you think it might take you to remember?" I asked. "Oh, could be a day or 2. Maybe longer. Memory's not what it used to be." Sunday morning, I was drinking coffee and watching Karen through my kitchen window. She was in her yard, taking pictures of the fence damage, probably for her insurance claim. She looked very pleased with herself. That's when Tony's truck rounded the corner, pulling a trailer with a massive yellow bulldozer chained to the back. I had to admit, seeing that D6 Caterpillar rolling down our quiet suburban street was impressive. The machine weighed nearly 20 tons and was as long as 2 cars parked end to end. Tony pulled up in front of Karen's house and began the process of unloading the bulldozer. Within minutes, Every neighbor on the block was outside watching the show. Karen emerged from her house in her bathrobe, her face shifting from confusion to alarm as the enormous machine was backed off the trailer and positioned squarely in her driveway. "What is that thing doing there?" she demanded, marching over to where Tony was completing his equipment check. "Equipment delivery, ma'am," Tony said politely. "This baby needs to be somewhere for a job tomorrow, but I can't quite remember where. Might take me a few days to sort it out. You can't leave that monster in my driveway." "Actually, ma'am, this is a public street. As long as I'm not blocking traffic or violating any parking ordinances, I can leave my equipment here for a reasonable amount of time." Karen's face was turning purple. "This is harassment. I'm calling the police." "You do that," Tony said cheerfully. "Make sure to mention that it's the same police department that took a report yesterday about your little accident with my brother's fence." Karen did call the police. Officer Martinez, who had taken the report about the fence, arrived within 30 minutes. He walked around the bulldozer, checked Tony's commercial driver's license and equipment permits, and confirmed that the machine was legally parked. "Ma'am," he told Karen, "the equipment is properly registered, the driver has all the right permits, and it's not blocking traffic. There's nothing illegal about parking construction equipment on a public street. But it's blocking my driveway." Officer Martinez looked at the driveway. The bulldozer was positioned so that Karen could still get her Jeep out, but she would have to navigate very carefully around the massive machine. "Your driveway isn't completely blocked," he observed. "You can still access your property." Karen was practically vibrating with rage. "This is deliberate. They're doing this because of the fence." "Ma'am, I can't speculate about motives. What I can tell you is that the equipment is legally parked. If you have concerns about harassment, you're welcome to file a complaint." After Officer Martinez left, Karen spent the rest of the day pacing around the bulldozer, taking pictures and making phone calls. "I spent the day sitting on my front porch enjoying the show." By Monday morning, our street had become a tourist attraction. Word had spread through social media about the bulldozer war, and people were driving by to see the massive machine parked in our quiet suburban neighborhood. The local news picked up the story, sending a reporter to interview both sides of the dispute. Karen gave a tearful interview about being terrorized by vindictive neighbors, and claimed she was afraid to leave her house. I declined to be interviewed on camera but provided the reporter with copies of all the police reports, HOA meeting minutes, and documentation of Karen's 6-month harassment campaign. The story that aired that evening was surprisingly balanced, but the public reaction was overwhelmingly on our side. The comments section of the news station's website was filled with people sharing their own horror stories about difficult neighbors and expressing support for creative solutions to harassment. Someone created a Facebook page called Team Bulldozer that gained 5,000 members in 2 days. A local coffee shop started selling t-shirts that said, "Don't mess with my fence," with a picture of a bulldozer on the front. But the most satisfying reaction came from our immediate neighbors. Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman who lived across the street, brought me a plate of cookies and said, "I've been waiting 3 months for someone to stand up to that woman. Good for you." The Johnsons, who lived 2 houses down, told me that Karen had complained to the city about their children's basketball hoop and had tried to get their teenager's car ticketed for loitering. Even the mailman expressed his support. "That lady yells at me every day about something," he said. "Delivery time, package placement, you name it. I hope that bulldozer stays there forever." By Tuesday, Karen was clearly feeling the pressure. The bulldozer had been parked in front of her house for 3 days, and the constant stream of curious visitors was making her neighborhood famous for all the wrong reasons. She tried a different approach. That afternoon, she knocked on my front door carrying a plate of store-bought cookies and wearing her most apologetic expression. "Mike," she said sweetly, "I think we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe we can work something out about the fence situation." I looked at her standing on my doorstep, trying to charm me after months of harassment, and felt my resolve strengthen. "What kind of working out did you have in mind, Karen?" "Well, what if we split the cost of replacing the fence with something more neighborly? Maybe a nice low hedge or a decorative border." "You mean after you pay for the fence you destroyed?" Her smile flickered. "Insurance will handle that. I'm talking about moving forward, being good neighbors. Karen, you spent 6 months trying to make my family's life miserable. You destroyed my property with your car. Now you want to negotiate because there's a bulldozer in your driveway? That bulldozer is harassment. You can't just park industrial equipment in a residential neighborhood." "Actually, I can. Just like you can accidentally ram your car into someone's fence, apparently." She dropped the fake friendly act. "How long is that thing going to be there?" As long as it takes my brother to remember where it's supposed to go. Could be days, could be weeks. Memory problems run in our family. Karen left without saying another word. By Wednesday, our story had gone viral. The local news story had been picked up by national outlets, and suddenly our quiet street was filled with news vans and reporters. The story had everything the media loved: suburban drama, David versus Goliath conflict, and a giant bulldozer as a prop. I was interviewed by 3 different news stations, a podcast, and 2 newspaper reporters. Each time I tried to focus on the real issue: how people with money and time can terrorize their neighbors with harassment campaigns that the legal system isn't equipped to handle. This isn't really about offense, I explained to one reporter. It's about what happens when someone decides to make your life miserable and has the resources to do it legally. Sometimes you have to get creative to level the playing field. Karen, meanwhile, was giving interviews to anyone who would listen, painting herself as the victim of a dangerous escalation, and claiming she feared for her safety. But her story started falling apart when other neighbors began speaking to reporters about her behavior. The Hendersons described how she had tried to get their dog taken away by animal control with false complaints about barking. The Parkers talked about how she had called the city repeatedly about their unsightly children's play equipment. Even Mrs. Chin, who barely spoke English, managed to communicate that Karen had complained about the foreign cooking smells from their kitchen. A pattern emerged of a woman who had systematically targeted multiple families in the neighborhood with harassment campaigns designed to force them to change their behavior or move away entirely. Thursday morning, I woke up to find Karen standing in her driveway, screaming at the bulldozer. She was still in her pajamas, her hair uncombed, yelling at a 20-ton piece of machinery as if it could hear her. "This is insane," she shouted at no one in particular. "You can't do this to me. I have rights." Several neighbors had come outside to watch the spectacle. Karen noticed the audience and turned her rage on them. "This is all your fault," she screamed at Mrs. Peterson. "You people are encouraging this terrorism." "Karen," Mrs. Peterson said calmly, "maybe you should go inside and have some coffee. Don't tell me what to do. You're all against me. This whole neighborhood is against me." She was clearly having some kind of breakdown, and I started to feel a little guilty about pushing her to this point. Then I remembered the 6 months of harassment, the destroyed fence, and my daughter's anxiety attacks. Karen spotted me watching from my porch and marched over, pointing an accusing finger at my face. "You think you're so smart," she yelled. "You think you've won. But I'm not done with you. I'll make your life so miserable you'll wish you'd never moved here." That's when I realized that my bulldozer strategy had accomplished something important. It had gotten Karen to show her true nature in public, where everyone could see exactly who we'd been dealing with. Friday morning, Tony knocked on my door with a smile on his face. "Good news, Mike. I finally remembered where that bulldozer is supposed to go." "Oh yeah? Where's that?" "Johnson Construction Project over on 5th Street. Funny how these things come back to you." Within an hour, the bulldozer was loaded back onto Tony's trailer and hauled away, leaving Karen's driveway empty for the first time in a week. I expected Karen to emerge from her house in triumph, claiming victory over the neighborhood bullies. Instead, I saw a for sale sign go up in her yard that afternoon. Mrs. Peterson filled me in on the details over coffee the next morning. "She called the realtor yesterday," she explained. "Apparently, she's decided that this neighborhood isn't compatible with her lifestyle. She's really moving? Packed up and left this morning. Staying with her sister in another state while the house sells. Said she couldn't stand living next to crazy people anymore." I looked out my kitchen window at Karen's empty house and felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. The fence, meanwhile, was already being rebuilt. My insurance company had expedited the claim once the story went viral, and Tony's crew was installing new sections that were even sturdier than the original. But the best part came when the new fence was finished and I was cleaning up the construction debris. Carlos found me in the backyard and helped me load the last of the broken fence posts into my truck. "Dad," he said, "I'm proud of what you did. You didn't let her win. Sometimes, son, you have to fight for what's right. But you have to be smart about it." "What do you mean?" "I didn't do anything illegal or harmful. I just made her life as uncomfortable as she'd made ours. Sometimes that's enough to make a bully realize they've picked the wrong target." The house next door sold within 2 months to a lovely family with twin toddlers and a friendly golden retriever named Charlie. Our new neighbors, the Thompsons, introduced themselves the day they moved in by bringing over homemade cookies and asking about the best schools in the area. "We heard there was some kind of neighbor dispute here," Mrs. Thompson mentioned during our first conversation. "Nothing you need to worry about," I assured her. That situation has been resolved. The media attention died down after a few weeks, but the story had an unexpected impact. 3 different cities contacted me about speaking at city council meetings about neighbor harassment and the limitations of current legal remedies. A lawyer in California used our case as an example in a successful campaign to strengthen anti-harassment ordinances in residential areas. Most surprisingly, I received dozens of letters from people around the country who had dealt with similar situations. Neighbors who used their resources to terrorize others, knowing that the legal system favored those who could afford lengthy battles. Many of them shared creative solutions they'd found to level the playing field against harassment campaigns. A man in Texas told me how he dealt with a neighbor who kept calling animal control about his chickens by getting the entire neighborhood to attend city council meetings in support of backyard chicken rights. A woman in Oregon described how she'd handled a neighbor's noise complaints about her children playing by organizing a kids' play day that brought families from all over town to use her backyard playground. The common thread in all these stories was that sometimes you have to think outside the box when dealing with bullies who use the system to harass others. A year later, as I sit on my back porch looking at my sturdy new fence and listening to the Thompson twins laughing in their yard, I reflect on what that whole experience taught me. First, documentation is everything. Every police report, every HOA meeting, every incident, it all mattered when the story went public and people needed to understand the full context. Second, community support is more powerful than legal action in many situations. Once our neighbors understood what was really happening, Karen lost any credibility she might have had. Third, sometimes the best defense is a creative offense. Karen expected me to fight her through lawyers and courts, where she had the advantage. The bulldozer was something she hadn't planned for. But most importantly, I learned that standing up to bullies, even when it seems impossible, is worth the risk. My family is happier now than we've been in years. Carlos got into his first-choice college and wrote his admission essay about learning to stand up for what's right. Sophia plays outside again and has made friends with the Thompson twins. Maria's headaches are gone, and she's back to her cheerful self. As for me, I sleep better knowing that I didn't let someone drive my family out of our home through harassment and intimidation. The bulldozer is back at Tony's equipment yard, waiting for its next construction job. But sometimes, when I drive by and see it sitting there, I smile and remember the week it served as the great equalizer in a suburban war. The fence stands strong, the neighbors are friendly, and our street is peaceful again. Sometimes that's all the victory you need. 6 months after Karen moved away, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was from her, postmarked from Arizona. Mike, it read, I've had time to think about what happened between us, and I want you to know that I understand now why you did what you did. I was wrong to destroy your fence, and I was wrong to make your family's life difficult. I hope you can forgive me, and I hope your new neighbors are better than I was. Take care of that fence, it's a good one. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was acknowledgement. Sometimes that's the best you can hope for. I showed the letter to Maria, who read it twice before folding it carefully and putting it in our kitchen drawer. Do you forgive her? She asked. I thought about it for a moment, looking out at our backyard where Sophia and the Thompson twins were playing on the swing set David had built last spring. I forgive her for moving away, I said finally. That was the best thing she ever did for our neighborhood. Maria laughed, and I knew everything was going to be okay. The bulldozer had done its job perfectly, not by destroying anything, but by giving a bully a taste of her own medicine until she decided to find somewhere else to cause trouble. In the end, that's all we really wanted. The freedom to live peacefully in our own home behind our own fence without someone trying to make our lives miserable. Mission accomplished.